Torches flared red against the night, their glow casting long, jagged shadows across the ranch yard. 6 gunmen spread out like wolves, cutting off every escape. At the gate stood Silas Crow, feared across 3 territories, his voice sharp as a death sentence. "Hand over the girl, Boone. $100 to save your life." Elias Boone's grip tightened on his rifle. Taking the money would mean Clara's death. He refused. Crow's smile turned cold. "Then, burn it down." Flames erupted, smoke billowed into the sky, gunfire shattered the silence. And in that chaos, with the fires heat at his back and danger closing in, a secret buried for 15 years rose from the shadows, ready to change everything. As gunfire cracked in the distance, Elias's mind slipped back, not in retreat, but in search of the choices that had brought him to this night. Ironwood Bluff had always been unforgiving, but the last 2 years were the worst. Drought split the ground into pale scars, dust replacing rain. His herd was halved, cattle gaunt, and debts piling high. Neighbors stopped visiting, and the ranch, once his father's pride, now felt like an anchor dragging him under that past. Yet he stayed. He stayed because leaving would mean abandoning the last thing that still tethered him to who he used to be. The land, the house, the smell of leather in the tack room, the creak of the windmill, and the old horse Dusty in the barn. Those things weren't much, but they were his. And now tonight, there was Clara. He hadn't planned to take her in. Lord knew he had nothing to offer a girl but a leaky roof, a dry well, and the protection of a man past his fighting prime. But after what he'd seen in that saloon 2 weeks ago, there'd been no choice. She had stood there in the stale smoke and lamplight, skin pale under a layer of dirt, eyes darting like a wild thing cornered. Her father's hand had been locked like iron around her arm, shoving her forward as if she were no more than a sack of grain to be traded. Ilias had seen cruelty before, in the army, in the cattle drives, even in the alleys behind Ironwood's main street. But there had been something in her expression that night. Not just fear. It was the stubborn will of someone who'd learned not to beg, because no one ever came when she called. That memory sat heavy in his chest now, as the gunmen shifted outside. The smell of smoke was stronger, mingling with the dry scent of dust through the open cracks in the cabin walls. Somewhere out there, Silas Crow was waiting for his answer. Elias already knew it. He just had to be ready for what came after. Jonas Pike's saloon smelled like every bad decision a man could make. Old whiskey, wet wood, and the sour ghost of last night's lies. Afternoon light slanted through warped shutters in pale stripes, dust motes turning slow circles in the beams. Elias Boone sat alone at a corner table with a cheap beer he'd stretched too long, reading the room like he always did, the ranch hand asleep on his arms, 2 card players bluffing with more bravado than coin, Pike polishing a glass, pretending not to watch for trouble. Trouble didn't knock, it staggered. Royce Tanner burst through the bat wings with the wind at his back and a girl clamped in his fist. Clara looked like she'd been starved of everything a child needs: food, safety, tenderness. Her dress was torn at the hem, one sleeve hanging by stubborn stitching, and her eyes had the haunted shine of an animal that's learned the fence bites. Royce hauled her to the bar and slapped the counter with a palm already reddened by drink. "Pike," he said, voice thick. "I want the good bottle, the one you keep under the floorboard." Jonas set the glass down and didn't reach for anything. "We're out of good, Royce, and you're out of tabs." Royce tightened his grip on Clara's arm until she flinched. "I got payment." He shoved her forward. The room didn't fall silent all at once. It sagged that way, like a roof beam splitting. The card players stopped lying. The ranch hand raised his head. Elias felt his stomach harden the way earth does before the first crack in a drought. "You're drunk," Pike said, but his voice was careful. "And you're not making sense." "I'm making more sense than this town ever did." Royce grinned, a broken thing. 14, clean, untouched. I'll take 3 bottles or 20 cash. Your pick." Clara didn't cry. She held herself still and small, as if willing herself invisible. Purple shadows under her eyes telling a longer story than Royce's mouth ever could. A story without trust, where even relief was a luxury she hadn't felt in a long time. "She's yours," Royce said, and a hard child besides. Needs a firm hand. Elias looked at him, and something behind his eyes must have gone very still because Royce stepped back half an inch. She needs food and a decent blanket, Elias said. Get out. Royce laughed, stuffed the bills into his pocket, and swaggered toward the door. You'll regret it, Boone. She runs off, she steals, she lies. She's nothing but trouble. He paused at the threshold. And trouble's coming for anybody who thinks they can cut me out of what's mine. The bat wings slapped shut. The room let out a breath. Pike leaned over the bar, voice hushed. Sheriff won't do a thing, Elias. Says it's family business till there's blood. You know how it is. I do, Elias said. He turned to the girl, careful as if approaching a wild foal. Clara, he said, tasting the name, you can come with me. No one's going to touch you. Her chin lifted a fraction. What do you want for it? Nothing, he said. Just your say-so. She studied his face like a map, trying to find the roads that lead to harm. After a beat, she nodded once. Less agreement than exhaustion. And that, Elias thought later, was the true law of the frontier. Not the code pinned to a sheriff's vest, but the bargains ordinary people made with their own fear. Some men traded daughters for bottles. Some men traded their last money for a stranger's chance at safety. The territory would call both choices. Only one of them had a remedy. Elias placed his hat on Clara's head because the sun outside was cruel, and he opened the door. On the porch, heat lay on the street like a warning. Somewhere far off, a dog barked and went quiet. He could feel the town watching without looking. Curtains shift, shutters breathe, mouths decide who they'll be if this comes to a fight. It will, Elias said to himself. It always does. He touched the brim of the hat to settle it on Clara's brow. Come on, girl. Let's go home. See her? The night air hit them like a slap as soon as they cleared the back door of Pike's saloon. Elias had Clara's wrist in one hand and his Colt in the other, the two of them moving fast through the narrow service alley that smelled of stale beer and horse manure. Somewhere behind them the shouts began. Low at first, then sharper, angrier. Silas Crow's men had spotted their exit. Keep moving, Elias whispered, though the girl was already keeping pace, her thin frame darting around barrels and crates with surprising agility. They burst out onto a side street where the moonlight laid silver stripes across the dirt. Dusty, Elias's old bay gelding, was tied to a post outside the cooper's shop. The horse lifted his head at the sound of boots pounding the ground. Elias didn't bother with gentleness. He swung Clara up into the saddle in one motion, vaulted up behind her, and wheeled the animal toward the edge of town. The first shot cracked the air before they'd gone 10 yards. Wood splintered from a rain barrel to their left. Elias felt Clara flinch under his arm. Don't look back, he told her, heels pressing into Dusty's sides. The gelding responded with a burst of speed, hooves drumming a hard rhythm on the packed earth. Behind them came more gunfire, the deep whoop of riders giving chase and the steady drum of pursuit. They took the north road out of Ironwood Bluff, a rutted track that led between the low, scrub-covered hills. The darkness out here was almost complete, save for the pale wash of moonlight on the land. The wind in their faces was sharp, carrying the dry scent of sage. How many? Clara asked, her voice tight. 3, maybe 4, Elias said. Enough. They rode hard for nearly a mile before Elias cut them off the road and into a dry arroyo. Dusty picked his way along the gully floor, while Elias listened for the sounds of pursuit. Above them, a coyote yipped, and another answered from farther east. The gunfire had stopped, but the hoofbeats hadn't. Elias found a narrow slot between 2 rock outcroppings and steered the horse into it, letting the darkness swallow them whole. They waited, breath loud in their own ears. The riders thundered past, not 50 yards away, torches flickering briefly against the night before vanishing toward the open flats. Clara let out a breath that was almost a sob. They won't stop, she said. You know that, don't you? I know, Elias said. That's why we keep moving. For a while they rode in silence, heading toward the ridge line where the land began to break into deeper canyons. Elias could feel the girl's tension in the set of her shoulders, the way she kept glancing into the dark as though expecting the night to sprout more enemies. Finally she spoke again, her voice small but steady. They want me because of Emma. Elias frowned. Emma? My sister. A pause. She's gone. Because of them. Nashrakshur. The words came halting at first, but then faster, as if keeping them inside was harder than letting them spill. Emma had worked at the Silver Star Inn in town, cleaning rooms for travelers. One night she'd gone into a room she thought was empty. Silas Crow's. Inside she'd found papers spread across the bed, mining maps, claims stamped with official seals that didn't look quite right. She'd told Clara about it later, whispering in the dark, explaining she thought the claims were forged, that Crow and his men were sitting on a silver strike that wasn't theirs. She said we had to tell someone, Clara said, voice cracking, but the next morning, she was gone. Just gone. People said maybe she left for a better job. But I knew. She swallowed hard. I knew they took her. Ilias kept his eyes on the trail ahead, the old ache in his chest returning like a ghost. And now you think they're after you because you know too much. I don't think, Clara said. I know, I told my father. I thought he'd help me. Instead, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Elias had seen exactly what her father had done in that saloon. The landscape shifted around them, hills rising higher, the shadows deeper. Elias felt the pieces falling into place. The mine, the forged claims, Crow's sudden interest in a half-starved girl. And beneath it all, another truth he'd been carrying for 15 years. His own daughter Mary, gone before her life had begun, taken by men just as cruel, in a time when Elias had been too far away to save her. He tightened his arm around Clara without thinking, a protective gesture that surprised them both. We'll get to the ranch, he said. It's not much, but it's defensible. They'll have to come through me to get to you. They will, Clara said, and they will try. Elias didn't argue. The moon slipped behind a cloud, and they kept riding, two figures moving deeper into the Badlands, carrying between them a secret that could kill them both, or, if they were lucky, save something worth keeping. The ranch came into view just as the first pale hints of dawn touched the eastern sky. Elias Boone's land looked even more weathered than usual, fences leaning, the barn's roof patched with mismatched boards, the main house leaning slightly as if bracing against the wind. To Clara it must have seemed small and tired, but to Elias it was the last outpost he could still call his own. Dusty slowed to a walk as they crossed the yard. Elias slid down first, then helped Clara dismount. She was stiff from the ride, her face drawn with exhaustion, but she kept her back straight. Inside the barn, the smell of hay and horse was comforting in its familiarity. Clara immediately reached for the bridle, running her hand along Dusty's neck. He's a good horse, she said softly. Best I ever had, Elias replied. Give him a rub down and fresh water. He earned it. While Clara tended to the horse, Elias went to the house, his mind already running through the work ahead. This ranch wasn't built to withstand a siege, but it could slow one down. He checked the windows, pulling shutters tight and setting the heavy iron latches. The front and back doors each got a crossbar. In the small kitchen, he moved the table against the wall to clear space for cover. When Clara came in, her sleeves rolled up and dust on her hands, Elias set an old Winchester on the table. Her eyes widened. You know how to shoot? He asked. She shook her head. Then you're going to learn. Might be you'll never need to, but if you do, you'd best be ready. He showed her how to hold the rifle, stock tight against the shoulder, cheek against the wood, both eyes open until you're ready to squeeze the trigger. Clara listened intently, mimicking his stance. She was awkward at first, but she adjusted quickly. Good, Elias said. Remember, it's not about pulling the trigger fast. It's about making sure the shot counts. They practiced loading and unloading, the metallic click of the rifle echoing in the stillness. Outside, the sky brightened to a dull gold, and the wind picked up, rustling the brittle grass. After an hour, Elias set the rifle aside. That's enough for now. Go eat something. In the kitchen, they shared bread, a few slices of dried meat, and strong coffee for Elias, water for Clara. For a moment, it almost felt like a normal morning. Two people at a table, not a target in the making. Clara even smiled faintly when Dusty whinnied from the barn. You live out here all alone? She asked. Most days, Elias said. It's quieter that way. Lonely? He shrugged. Some kinds of lonely you get used to, some you don't. She didn't press him. By mid-morning, Elias had set up firing positions, one in the loft of the barn, another behind a stack of feed sacks in the main room. He placed extra ammunition within reach, checked the oil in his Colt, and filled the lamp with fresh kerosene in case the fight came after dark. In the distance, the land shimmered under the rising sun. A hawk circled lazily overhead. For hours, the ranch was quiet, deceptively so. Just after noon, Elias caught sight of a dust plume far off along the south ridge. He lifted the old spyglass from its hook and steadied it. 6 riders, maybe 7, moving slow but steady. Even without the glass, the man in front was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, black coat, and the cold patience of someone who never rushed to kill. Silas Crow was coming. Elias lowered the glass, jaw set. "They've found us," he said quietly. Clara looked up from the barn doorway, her expression tightening. She didn't ask how much time they had. She didn't need to. The war for this ranch had just begun. By late afternoon, the sun had dropped low enough to paint the yard in long, dark shadows. The riders approached in a slow, deliberate line, the creak of leather and the muted jingle of spurs carrying across the dry air. Elias Boone stood on the porch, rifle in hand, while Clara watched from just inside the doorway, her fingers curled around the edge of the frame. Silas Crow rode at the front, a black duster flaring around him with each step of his horse. Even from a distance, Elias could see the faint smirk under Crow's wide-brimmed hat. When they reached the gate, Crow dismounted with the unhurried grace of a man who believed the land was already his. He stopped just outside the fence, boots raising small clouds of dust. "Boone," he called, his voice carrying like a judge passing sentence. "I'm here to make you a fair offer. Hand over the girl, and I'll put $100 in your hand. That's more than enough to pay off what you owe and buy yourself a fresh start somewhere else." Elias kept the rifle steady, resting against his shoulder. "Not interested." Crow tilted his head. "You might want to think twice. I don't make the same offer twice." "You won't have to," Elias said. The faint smirk on Crow's face deepened into something colder. "Then you're telling me you'd rather keep a problem than walk away rich?" "I'm telling you I'm not in the business of selling children," Elias replied. "And you're not walking away with her." Crow took a slow step forward, his men fanning out behind him. "She's carrying something that belongs to me. Papers. Information that could ruin me if it ended up in the wrong hands. Hand her over, and this ends without blood." Elias's eyes didn't leave Crow. "Counteroffer, you turn that horse around, ride back the way you came, and I don't send word to the territorial marshal about those forged mining claims you've been passing off as legitimate." That got Crow's attention. The smirk vanished, replaced by a hard, flat stare. The air between them tightened, as if the whole yard was holding its breath. "You've been listening to stories," Crow said. "I've been listening to the truth," Elias shot back. For a long moment, neither man moved. The riders shifted in their saddles, the horses tossing their heads. Somewhere off to the west, a hawk cried out, its voice thin against the heavy silence. Crow's voice dropped to a low, dangerous rumble. "Burn them out!" The command was simple, but the effect was immediate. 2 of his men swung down from their horses, pulling oil-soaked rags from their saddlebags. Another struck a match, the tiny flame flaring bright in the shadow of the porch. Elias stepped back into the doorway, blocking Clara from view. "Get to the back room," he told her. "Now!" She didn't argue. The first torch hit the dry porch boards, flames racing upward and spilling orange light along the rails toward the eaves. The fire spread fast, orange light spilling across the porch rails and climbing toward the eaves. Smoke curled thick and black into the darkening sky, carrying with it the promise that this fight was about to turn deadly. The fire's glow lit the yard in an angry orange, turning every shadow into something alive. Elias Boone stepped out onto what remained of the porch, rifle up, eyes locked on Silas Crow. Clara stayed low inside, her small hands clutching the Winchester Elias had shown her how to use. Crow gave a small nod, and the first shot cracked through the night. It splintered the post beside Elias's head, showering him with wood chips. He dropped to one knee, returning fire in a single smooth motion. One of Crow's men pitched backward off his horse, a surprised shout dying in his throat. The air filled with gunfire, sharp cracks and deep booms echoing off the barn. Bullets tore through boards, sending splinters flying like wasps. Elias moved between cover points, the heat of the fire searing his back. He caught sight of Crow leveling his revolver and squeezed off a shot. Crow staggered, clutching his side, but stayed on his feet, his face twisted with fury. Another shot rang out from the flank, and pain exploded in Elias's shoulder. He spun halfway around, the rifle nearly falling from his grasp. Gritting his teeth, he slammed his back against the barn wall, blood soaking through his shirt. Every breath burned, but he kept his focus, firing again to drive Crow's men back. Inside the cabin, Clara fired through a broken window, her shot shattering the lantern of a man trying to circle toward the back. The sudden darkness on that side gave Elias a chance to push forward. Crow's men were wavering, two down, another clutching a bleeding leg. Rufus Hale, Crow's broad-shouldered second-in-command, stayed in place, eyes scanning the chaos. Elias caught that hesitation. Hale wasn't shooting as much as he was watching. In a brief lull, Elias called out, his voice rough from smoke. "You think this man would do the same for you, Hale? You think he'd take a bullet to keep you alive?" Hale didn't answer. Crow did. "Don't listen to him. He's desperate. He knows he's finished." Elias stepped out from cover, rifle lowered but ready. "You want to know why I won't hand her over, Hale? Because I've seen what Crow does to girls like her. 15 years ago, he took my Mary. My little girl was 14, same age as Clara. I was away on a cattle drive. By the time I found her, she was dead, worked to death in one of his brothels." The words hung in the air heavier than the smoke. Even the fire seemed to pause, its roar dimming in Elias's ears. Crow's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Hale's gaze shifted to Clara, then back to Elias. His grip on his revolver loosened. "She had a laugh that could fill a room," Elias continued, voice cracking. "When I saw Clara in that saloon, I swear it was like God was giving me one last chance to do right. I won't fail her the way I failed my Mary. Not for money, not for my own life," Crow snarled. "Enough of this." He raised his gun, but before he could fire, Elias's shot caught him in the chest. The outlaw leader staggered, dropping to one knee. His revolver clattered into the dirt. Hale sat frozen in the saddle, staring at Crow. The rest of the men exchanged uneasy glances, their leader bleeding out in the dirt. The fight drained from their eyes, and in that moment, the battle shifted. Not because of bullets, but because the truth had found its mark. The yard was quiet now, save for the crackle of the dying fire and the groans of the wounded. Smoke hung low, curling around the barn like a shroud. Rufus Hale swung down from his horse, tossing his revolver into the dirt. "I'm done," he said, his voice flat but firm. "Ain't worth it anymore." Two of Crow's remaining men followed suit, their guns hitting the ground with dull thuds. Clara stepped cautiously from the cabin, the Winchester still in her hands. Her eyes went first to Elias, who was pressing a rag to his bleeding shoulder, then to Crow, sprawled in the dirt, barely conscious. Without a word, she knelt beside him, not to help, but to search. From inside his coat, she pulled a thick envelope, the flap sealed with a smudge of wax. She opened it and scanned the contents: maps, forged mining claims, and ledger pages marked with names and numbers. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady when she said, "This is what Emma saw. This is what they killed her for." Elias nodded, his gaze never leaving her face. "We'll get it to the marshal. It'll put him away for good." By the time the law arrived from Ironwood Bluff, Crow was too weak to stand. They loaded him onto a wagon, still cursing through bloodied lips, but his voice had lost its edge. Hale gave a brief nod to Elias before mounting his horse and riding out alone, his future uncertain but no longer tied to Crow's shadow. When the yard was empty again, Clara stood beside Elias, the evidence clutched to her chest. "What happens now?" she asked. Elias looked at the scorched boards of the porch, the blackened marks on the walls, then back at her. "Now we rebuild. Could use an extra set of hands?" She hesitated. "You want me to stay?" "I do," he said. "I can't promise it'll be easy, but I can promise you'll be safe and wanted." For the first time since he'd met her, Clara's guarded expression softened into something warmer. "I'd like that," she said quietly. The wind shifted, carrying away the last of the smoke. For Elias Boone, it felt like breathing again after 15 long years. Out on the frontier, a man's worth wasn't measured by his land or cattle, but by the lines he refused to cross. Elias Boone could have taken the money, walked away, and no one would have blamed him. But in doing so, he'd have surrendered the very thing that made him a man, the choice to stand for what's right, even when it costs you. That lesson isn't just for the 1800s. In today's America, we still face moments where integrity is tested. In our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, even in our own families. Sometimes the easy road comes with a price too high to pay. And maybe that's what this story is really about. The courage to protect the vulnerable, even when you're running on empty yourself. Now, I'd like to hear from you. What would you have done in Elias's place? Could you risk everything for a stranger? And here's a thought. What if Clara hadn't been innocent? What if saving her meant putting others at risk? Would the choice still be so clear? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Thank you for riding through this story with me. If it spoke to you, give it a like, subscribe for more, and keep these conversations alive. Stories may end, but their lessons should never fade.